So this is her argument, and she says a defense of abortion, and she gives pretty good arguments for it. She's going to be a little different than most other feminists. She starts off by saying, unlike many pro-choice advocates, pro-choice is the capacity for a woman, if she wants to, terminate a pregnancy. The law says within the entire pregnancy, a woman has that right. She has eminent domain, except for late term, third term, intact dilation, and extraction abortions. We talked about that on Monday. Most pro-choice advocates base their argument on the fact that a fetus is not a person, not legally, and also the first 2 weeks when you go from a fertilized egg, it doubles, then it goes to 4 to 8 to 16, 32. We call that a blastocyst, a blast of cells, and they say it's just a clump of cells. It's not really a person. And that's the foundation of the pro-choice argument. It's not really a person. When you look at it, it doesn't look like a person. It looks like a bunch of cells. She's going to give up that and say, let's say it is a person from the beginning. So she starts with a different argument. Everybody understand that? Okay. Unlike many pro-choice advocates, Thompson grants for the sake of the argument that the fetus is a person with full moral rights. If you're a person, you have full moral standing. You can't do to people who have full moral standing what you can do to entities that don't have full moral standing. Given this assumption, Thompson argues that it does not follow that abortion is always immoral. So she holds on to the pro-choice argument. It's legal. You have a right to do it. But she is going to say there's one instance where perhaps it isn't. That if you were to terminate an abortion in a pregnant woman, that would be considered an unjust killing because it violates the fetus's right to life. Do you see the difference there? She's making a technical point. She's saying everybody has a right to life. But there are times when one person's right to life exceeds another person or another entity's right to life, and we have a right to preserve our own life. So if a woman's life is at stake in an ectopic pregnancy and the egg gets stuck in the fallopian tube, a woman has a right to save her life and terminate the life of the existence of the embryo. So there's times where the right to life can be overridden by another right to life. So the woman has a greater right to life than the embryo does. There's one instance, she says, where the right to life of the embryo can supersede the right to life of the woman. And then she's going to give us some examples. And some of the examples sound pretty cool, and some of them have holes in them, and I'll point that all out. But you have to understand what she's saying here. A just killing is to preserve life. An unjust killing is where you just preserve your own life without justification for taking another person or another entity's life. So she's building her argument on something called unjust killing versus right to life. And she's going to define right to life and unjust killing so that she can make her argument. And you're going to be tested on understanding whether you understand unjust killing, whether you understand right to life. The way she's defining it, not the way you may believe in it yourself. We understand those two parameters there? Okay. To take her case, she presents a vivid thought experiment. I'll give that to you in a few minutes. So let's start here. Most opposition to abortion relies on the premise that the fetus is a human being, a person from the moment of conception. According to this argument, we're asked to notice that the development of a human being from conception to birth into childhood is continuous. Then it's said that to draw the line, to choose a point in development and say before this point the thing isn't a person, after this point it is a person, is to make an arbitrary choice. So we have a fertilized egg. Is that a person? And the argument says no. Then we have a blastocyst, and it works its way through the fallopian tube. It drops into the womb. Is this a person? No. And then suddenly it becomes what we call an embryo. Okay, is this a person? Well, no. And then it becomes a fetus, and it begins to take on the visual formation of a person. It's got little nubs here, and we can see through our technology it's got a rudimentary heart system, and da-da-da. Is that a person? And she's saying deciding when it's a person is arbitrary. You can't just look at something and say, okay, now it is, and now it isn't, or then it isn't, and now it is. A choice for which in nature of things there's no good reason. Therefore, it is concluded that the fetus is a person from the moment of conception. This is really different for a feminist and an abortionist argument, but she's going to give you that. And she thinks her reasoning to justify abortion is valid, and then we'll go into the reasoning for it. However, similar things might be said about the development of an acorn into an acorn tree. Yet it does not follow that acorns are oak trees. Well, absolutely right. An acorn is an acorn. It's not a tree. If I looked at an acorn, if I had the capacity to get you an acorn, I said, what does this look like? How many of you would say it looks like an acorn tree? It doesn't. Yet. Therefore, a newly fertilized egg, a newly implanted clump of cells, is no more a person than an acorn is a tree. what are the strengths and weaknesses of this argument? I mean, the argument makes sense. How many of you think an acorn is an acorn tree? It's not. It's true that acorns are not oak trees. They're the seeds of oak trees. However, they cannot become anything but an oak tree when they grow up. Therefore, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck and sounds like a duck, there's a good chance it's going to turn out to be a duck. Yes? Yes and no. Yeah, the purple is. Yeah, my comments I'll point out to you, but the purples are hers. Thank you for that. So what's the strength of her argument? Well, it's got legs to it. All arguments have legs to it. An acorn is not a tree. It's a corn. It's an acorn.
But an acorn has to be planted.
It has to be planted.
But like in the instance that she's comparing it to, the fetus is already planted.
Well, what's if we take the fetus out of planet and we just put it in a petri dish, in vitro?
Anything, not a person.
No, if you have a fertilized egg, of course it is. I just haven't put it in the womb. I've done it outside the womb rather than naturally in the womb. Until I put it in the womb, it's not going to grow up yet.
Her argument that it's not a person because the acorn's not a tree. Is that what her argument is? Is that what I'm getting out of that?
Yeah, she says, yeah, okay, it can't be anything but an acorn tree, but it's not a tree. It's an acorn. The same thing with an ovum is what she's saying. It's not a person yet. It will be a person. It can't be anything but a person, but it's not a person yet. Well, that logic holds, except it doesn't hold, because the acorn can't be anything but a tree under the right circumstances, and this egg can't be anything but a person under the right circumstances. So it goes back to her original argument. So it's arbitrary to decide what is a person, but then she flips it over and says, well, by the way, egg is not a person any more than an acorn is a tree. Well, yes and no. Of course that's true, but it can't be anything but an acorn tree, and it can't be anything other than a person. And that'll take us to the discussion in the second half. It's a great point, but it shares the analogy. You see the analogy there. Jada?
I think maybe the loophole is the acorn can't become a tree unless you plant it and water it, fertilize it, whatever. And if you have a fertilized egg, it can't become a fetus without attaching to cell wall of the uterus, which seems to be the same thing as planting the acorn into the ground.
Correct.
During that process, yes, you have a fertilized egg and the acorn, yeah, they're the same thing. They haven't started the process, but I think once it attaches itself and it does start to grow, then it's the same thing as the acorn being in the ground. It's starting to grow.
Exactly. Until we learn to grow people in test tubes completely. You know, Judge Dredd, I am the law. Yeah, but that's down the road. So what I'm pointing out, here's another philosopher. She's a philosopher, and she makes an argument that makes sense to us until you really examine the heart of the argument. And then, yeah, that makes sense, but... Okay. You were going to share something. What were you going to share?
I was going to say for her to say that acorns are not oak trees, but she just previously stated that to draw a line between personhood and non-personhood is arbitrary. Either you are a person from conception or you're not a person. We're not people, so we have to be people. So it's just, there's a giant hole in the argument.
It's called circular reasoning. But you see her reasoning. She wants to grant the fact, okay, let's make it a person. But is this really a person? Well, not yet. It can only be a person.
So there is a defined line.
Well, she's making an argument. Let her argue, okay? Look, this is a philosophy class, people. This is about critical thinking. That's about, you look at this and you go, well, yeah, that's right. I was with a professor in grad school, a fellow named Paul Ziff, an absolute genius, close to a 200 IQ level. And he was one of these philosophers of mind, and he would think up these things. And she'll give you some thought experiments in a minute. So we're in one of his seminars, and he's there, and he says, I was thinking about this. And he laid it out in such a way. I'm sitting there listening to it, and I go, that makes sense to me. And then he says, until I realize this. And then he kind of turns the corner, and it says, oh, I didn't see that coming. And so he makes a twist in it. And the twist looks really good now. And I said, yeah, okay, now I get it. And then he twists it again. And he led us all around the room for about an hour and a half, and he just kept going from same thing, but twisting it around and looking at it from different ways. We call that phenomenology in philosophy. And it was like, wow, how'd you do that? critical thinking, being able to look at something and examine it from all sides. So she presents us with what we call a hypothesis or premise. Let's assume it's a person from beginning, but now she's going to look at it and go, well, is it really a person? Any more than an acorn is really a tree. Well, it is and it isn't. It's an argument, but you have to be able to see through some of it. For the sake of the argument, let's grant that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception. How does the pro-life argument go on from here? Every person has a right to life. Full moral standing. You can't do things to people that you can do to things that aren't people. So the fetus has a right to life. No doubt, however, the mother has a right to decide what shall happen in and to her body. She has a right to life as well. Everybody would grant that, 4th, 9th, and especially the 14th Amendment. Surely a person's right to life is stronger and more stringent, more powerful than the mother's right to decide what happens in and to her body, so it outweighs it. So the fetus may not be killed and an abortion may not be performed. Of course, the woman has capacity to do other things, and the fetus has only the capacity to live.
About this, I like to remember that, like, if the fetus is alive, doesn't that mean the body is being shared by the fetus and the woman? Doesn't make it just the woman's body.
Actually, within, if I remember this right, and I always leave myself open to correction, I think by about week 6 or 7, the fetus is on its own. No, I don't, but thank you. No, because I've read it before, but sometimes I get my numbers a little off. But it's not too far into where the fetus is on its own. It's not dependent on the mother. You need it, but it's also operating under its own accord and beginning to grow and nourish itself and all of this stuff. So it's a toss-up. And it's another one of those points we can bring into the equation and say, so, you know, I appreciate that. Appreciate it. So she comes up with this experiment. She says, let's think about an unconscious violinist who's the premier, the #1 violinist in the world, and he's got a disease, and in order to cure himself or be cured, we're going to have to hook him up to your kidney system. And if you just will lay in bed for 9 months, his blood, you know what your kidney, you know, the uric acid, and they get through all these, and after 9 months he'll be completely cured. You can get out of bed and go live your life you want to, but without your help he's going to die. We'll lose the most premier violinist in the world. And she says, would that be legitimate if they didn't ask your permission? Or if they did ask your permission, do you owe that violinist to use of your body in order for that violinist's life to survive? Do you owe that entity anything, regardless of its stature in the world, the best violinist or not? We see where she's going with this, right? Okay, so she says, suppose you wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist. He's been found to have a fatal kidney ailment and found that you alone are the right blood type to help him. Last night you were kidnapped and the violinist's circulatory system plugged into yours so that your kidneys can be used, We're sorry the Music Lovers Society did this to you. You would have never permitted it had you known. Unplugging him would kill him, so we're asking you to allow him to remain plugged into you for 9 months. By then he will have recovered from his ailment and can safely be unplugged from you. The important question is this: is it morally incumbent on you to agree to this situation? Granted, you have a right to decide what happens in and to your body, but a person's right to life outweighs your right to decide what happens in and to your body when your life is not at stake.